Hey there, listeners. Welcome to STJ's Breaking Into podcast series, the podcast where we speak with professionals with glittering careers working at the top of their respective tree as CEOs, managing directors, board members, and directors or heads of function. And we deep dive into where they started and what they've been through to get to where they are today. The series is aimed at answering the question, how did they get that job? And perhaps, how can you get that job? So it is aimed at professionals who are either about to embark on their chosen career, or perhaps those who just fancy a change and would like to get some insight into what it really takes to climb the corporate ladder from people who have successfully been there and done it. I'm your host, Kris Bryant, and following a career of more than 27 years, and with many of those as a Director of Compliance, Risk and Financial Crime, and operating at board level, I have for a number of years now been the founder and director of STJ Consultancy Solutions, your trusted partner in all things consultancy and recruitment, and I am absolutely thrilled to have you join us on this journey. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe, rate and review our podcast on your favourite platform. Your support helps us to keep bringing you engaging content. Also, if you have any ideas or suggestions on topics you would love for us to cover, people you'd like for us to get on the show, or suggestions on specific roles you'd be interested in hearing about, then please do put information in the comments or send us an email at info@stjconsultancysolutions.co.uk and we will do our best to oblige. Hello everybody. On today's episode we're back delving into the heights of compliance. I'm delighted to be joined today by another fantastic guest. She's been there and done it and now operates as a head of compliance for Fluro. Laura has very kindly agreed to join me today to talk through her experiences from the very beginning, discuss her journey and give her view on what it really takes to make it in the world of compliance. So welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you, Kris. I'm really pleased to be able to join you and hopefully inspire more people to get involved in compliance.
That's brilliant. That's what the show's for, right? I'm sure everybody's itching to hear about what you've been up to, so let's kick on. So perhaps to start with, you could tell us a little bit about yourself and what your current role entails.
Of course. So right now I'm head of compliance for Fluro. Fluro is a consumer lender. It's a small business, so we are around 60 people right now. And Fluro started out as a peer-to-peer lender, so it used to take in customer money and lend that money out to other people. And we've moved more recently to lending out funds from banks, which obviously means that we can lend out more money to more people.
Excellent. I mean, it's growing, right?
Definitely. And right now, so I'm, like you say, I'm head of compliance. I have a team of compliance and risk people, so we support the business and help everybody make sure that everything they do is good for consumers and good by the rules.
Excellent. So what does a typical day look like for you?
Every day for me is different, which I really, really like. I don't think I ever have 2 days that are the same, but I can be involved in weeks where I'm in lots of committee meetings, which means I'm sitting down with various different stakeholders and talking about things that are really important to the business, approving things, discussing where we might want to take certain initiatives. Other days I might sit quite quietly, write a policy or write up a report. And I like to spend a good chunk of my time with my team. So, I want to make sure that my team is really well supported. So we spend lots of time sort of sitting together, discussing the things that we're seeing, discussing the things that people are getting involved in and hopefully being able to share ideas and support one another so that we're really doing the best thing that we can for the business.
Let's flip to the other side. So what do you find are the most challenging aspects of the job and how do you go about trying to manage those?
I think the most challenging aspects, being in a small organisation means that everybody needs to get stuck into lots of different things. And for people who are familiar with the way that a compliance team normally functions, you would sit in more of an advisory role. So you will have your people in the business who are going out doing the stuff. And then in compliance, you'll be there to help to advise, to shape, to talk to people about what the legal or regulatory requirements might be. And in a small organisation, it can be quite hard to delineate that sort of thing. So sort of making sure that we're not coming across as telling people what to do, which certainly isn't the way that the team operates. But at the same time, also being able to say, well, I can't tell you what to do, as much as you might like me to, because that's not quite how the role functions. And so that's probably the biggest challenge. And I think, in the roles that I've been in across various different organisations, it can be resource challenges. Senior management in some organisations don't always fully appreciate the need to invest in compliance, which is definitely not the case where I work right now. But also, kind of bringing people on board. If your senior management don't think that compliance is important, it can then be really challenging to get people in the business to take it seriously.
Yeah, and it's rare to find one that is that heavily invested, I would say. It's not a fee-generating function. It's a kind of a necessary function that firms have to have. And therefore, historically, they don't tend to grow at the same rate as the rest of the firm.
Yeah, I mean, I firmly believe that a really good compliance and risk function is a business enabler. You help the business do well, particularly in the environment that we're operating in today. But it's definitely challenging when you don't get that buy-in. And like you say, I've been in many a firm, sort of both in the compliance function and in advisory type roles in consultancy firms, where senior management, for want of a better phrase, don't get it. And coming into my current role and, having a leadership team, from the CEO and actually sort of boards down that really buy into compliance is a breath of fresh air, and it makes my job much easier and much more enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely. You may have to give me your CEO's number. Excellent. Perhaps we can learn some things from them. So within the business, how do you tend to try and balance the need for strict compliance with regulation and in many cases legislation too, but balance that with the needs of the business and its strategic goals?
So I actually find that in my current role, it's easy is probably the wrong word, but Fluro is a very consumer-focused organisation, which when we think about the regulatory requirements that apply in the financial services sector, I'm conscious that not all of the people listening will be familiar with what those are, but our primary regulator ultimately wants to ensure that customers get good outcomes, that the market functions well, we don't have big firms falling over. And if you put customers at the heart of what you do, it makes compliance generally quite simple. So that makes my job a little bit easier. I think where the challenge actually comes is in the business that I operate in today, we're stuck with some really old rules and legal requirements, which almost hinder our ability to support customers. So from a credit perspective, you've got the Consumer Credit Act, which was written in 1974, before the internet. And you've got requirements in there that perhaps they've been added to later dates, but certain things that you have to tell customers and certain notices, which, whatever which way you try and put them, are not very customer friendly. So I think that's the biggest challenge in sort of balancing the things that we have to do with the way that we want to run our business and be sort of very consumer focused and make communications accessible and easy to understand, with these sort of slightly out of date things hindering us.
Yeah, it sounds kind of tough.
Yeah, and there's been talk of the rules being brought into the FCA handbook for as long as I can remember now. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon, but
it has to eventually, right?
Yeah, eventually. Although I think that's been the case since 2014. So I think you just have to be pragmatic about it, and from that perspective, do the things that you have to do and find ways of achieving compliance with everything else that you do.
Yeah, understood. So change focus ever so slightly. So again, sticking with challenges, but from a slightly different angle, what do you think are the biggest challenges facing compliance people in today's market?
I think the sort of resource challenges that I mentioned earlier, it can be really tough and you can be spread quite thin. Most recently, it's been the volume of, I think it's been the case for a number of years now, but noticeably recently, thankfully slightly staved off by the general election, which kind of put a pause to it, but the volume of things coming out of the regulator. So,
Yeah.
Dear CEO letters, policy statements, changes to rules, which for a small organisation, they put a huge pressure, because not only are you then having to kind of interpret, digest, explain to the business what these things mean, you're then supporting the business in applying that change, which again, for a small organisation that's going through a lot of change itself, having to add to the workload of people who are already sort of stretched and juggling multiple different priorities can be quite difficult.
Yeah, indeed. Is that perhaps somewhere that there's a lot of focus on various types of technology out there in the industry? Perhaps that's something that may help to ease that burden a little bit.
Potentially, I think technology is brilliant. We're a fintech company, so like our focus is on the customer journey and making it as automated and seamless and digital as possible. And I've definitely noticed certainly in my current role, we have technology to support the compliance function, which is something that's fairly new to me, having been in roles where we've balanced things with some very unwieldy and temperamental spreadsheets. So it absolutely makes life easier, but at the same time, there's a huge investment that goes into that. So you don't get a nice compliance system and all of a sudden it makes your life easier. You have to maintain it and get it into really good working order for it to function well, and also get buy-in from people to use it. There's no point in having a system that people in the business don't use.
No.
So I think it introduces its own challenges, and
for sure.
I hope that technology will help make compliance roles kind of easier and more endurable, sort of stripping out some of the stuff that might be really time consuming. But I don't see technology replacing compliance, even with
absolutely not. And I think you kind of drew this out a little bit just now, but I think where a lot of firms seem to be struggling now is where they've tried to run a bit before they can walk. So they introduce all these great tech systems, which are fantastic at what they do, but they're only as good as how they're set up and managed, right? So what you feed into it is pretty much what you get back out the other end, albeit quicker. So that's where a lot of firms seem to be struggling with some of these newfangled technologies, I think.
Yeah. And I think with, when you're implementing technology to support compliance or anything else, really, you need to work back from what it is that you want to get out of it, because otherwise you will end up with a huge volume of data and you don't know what to do with it. Or you end up with a huge volume of data and you say to your senior management, look, I've got all of this data. And they turn around and say, kind of, so what does it tell
exactly
me?
Right.
So, I think having the end goal in mind as to what you want to achieve from it is really important, and investing the time and getting it set up in the right way.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Excellent. So I'm going to backpedal a little bit now and ask what is one of my favourite questions ever, which I ask of everybody, so I'm very sorry to do it to you, Laura, but what did you want to be when you grew up, when you were a child?
Honestly, I didn't ever have a clear vision of what I wanted to do. And I think if somebody asked me today, well, what do you want to do when you grow up, I'd probably still say, oh, I'm not so sure. It is funny, I listened to one of your previous episodes, and I think the person said that they were sort of interested in kind of crime and forensics and that sort of thing. I did go through a stint of thinking that perhaps I might want to go into the police force. I had my grandfather was a police officer, and it sort of felt like one of those things that might be a good thing to do. I didn't get in. I also went through that thing that was popular at the time. Again, I don't know if it's popular today, but the sort of graduate scheme thing when you finish university and you will go off and try and get a job with a retailer or like whoever it is that might want to accept a graduate on a salary that you think is like going to make you a millionaire. In a short space of time.
YouTube these days, right?
Yeah, I think everyone I knew at the time, and I was one of those people, applied for MI5, again, didn't get in. So I didn't really know, but actually it's funny when I reflect on the path that I've had to where I am now, it is sort of somewhat linear, and the job that I do today works really well with the skills that I probably had when I was, kind of becoming a teenager and, going to university. So it's all worked out well.
Can we ask what you did at university?
I did philosophy, so I went into that because I'd really enjoyed doing it at A level, and it's sort of one of those subjects that I think a lot of people would go, "Oh, like, what are you going to do with that?" But actually, it's been really valuable to me in the work that I've done. Applying sort of critical thinking. There's a lot of things that I get really fascinated by to do with kind of language and logic, and all of those things are so useful when you're doing an analytical role. And then also just more broadly, sort of, there's lots of links with psychology and behaviour and all those sorts of things that, what affects, why do we act like we do? And I think all of those things are really interesting and relevant to a compliance role.
Yeah, me too. I was always very interested in psychology, and it's that kind of understanding what makes people tick and how they work, and being a bit kind of mechanically minded, but around thoughts and processes rather than engineering mechanical. Yeah, very interesting. So what then took you into compliance? How did you end up going in that way?
Again, a slightly wonky start. After I finished university, having not gotten into MI5 or any of the graduate schemes that I really hoped to get into, I actually moved sort of far away from where I was living and needed a job. So I moved to Norwich, which is kind of the home of insurance, I think. I think it's probably still true today. I didn't go to the big insurer, but I ended up working for a small insurance company, and I was working in travel insurance and wedding insurance. And as much as I wouldn't sort of say in that kind of, I was in sort of a customer support type role, I suppose. I learned so much, and I found myself just naturally becoming the person that people would go to understand terms and conditions and sort of get their head around, quite complex queries and information. And so I really enjoyed doing things like that. And I think, having done that sort of a role, you don't have to have done that to go into compliance or anything else. But when you've been in that sort of customer facing role, it can really help you to understand the mindset of the people that, in any retail financial services sector are sort of dealing with customers at the other end of the phone. I think it gives you sort of empathy and experience that you just possibly wouldn't understand if you haven't been in that position yourself.
Yeah, agreed. So as you kind of progressed in your career, what were the kind of major challenges that you faced as you went through?
I think it was knowing specifically what I wanted to do. So at that point in my career, I was fresh out of university. I needed a job. I didn't necessarily know about the types of role that might exist within that sort of business. It wasn't really anything that I had looked into before. And I think, back then we're talking too long ago, perhaps, sort of early 2000s, the regulatory sector wasn't where it is today. And so I ended up, I moved back to my hometown and again needed a job and ended up doing something that wasn't at all related to compliance, but sort of naturally found my way back there, and ended up working for a consultancy firm. And I think that was the point at which I could see that there were sort of these opportunities out there that would be really aligned with my skill set and what I enjoyed doing. But to answer your question, it was then the challenge of getting from, well, I'm doing this role within this firm and I can see these things over there that are kind of really interesting, but I've got absolutely no idea as to how I might get there. And actually for me, it was through sort of self-development. And what I mean by that is finding opportunities in the role that I was in to get involved in the things that I wanted to be involved in. So I was doing a role where I helped sort of match contractors who were doing compliance type work with roles that firms might need the compliance type people to support. And I found myself helping out with a project that we were doing with a massive insurance company to deliver basically new starter training for all of these people who were going to join this new insurer. And it was really through that I got involved with kind of conversations with people in the insurance firm. I got involved with people who were delivering the training. I went and visited and took part in some of the training. And, all of those things really just helped to sort of shape me. And then through that, I was actually offered a role in the other part of the business that I've been eyeing up. So it all worked out really well.
Yeah. So it's fair to say you kind of got yourself out there and really focused on your own development and started to kind of think about what your progression may look like and really kind of took aim at it and went for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's easier said than done. Probably if you're in the position of, kind of seeing the thing and not quite knowing how to get to the thing. But actually there's an awful lot that you can do to upskill and develop and sort of show people that you're interested. And in my experience, in all of the organisations that I've been in, when people have done that, management have been receptive to it. And, if you offer to help out with something that somebody needs help on, it's highly unlikely that they're going to say no.
Yeah, I mean, if generally speaking, most firms, if it can be seen as beneficial to the business, most have a budget for continued development, right? So, most firms are quite willing to help you develop if they can see something that's going to benefit them at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So during that process, was there any sponsorship, any mentorship, anything like that helped you to get through?
Yeah. So I think sponsorship is probably the main thing that helped me get through. I mean, mentorship through the experience that I just described, I absorbed as much as I possibly could from the people that I was working with at the time. So I was in a very fortunate position in that I didn't have a family or kids or anything at that time. I had the freedom of being able to get on a plane and we were going sort of not anywhere particularly exotic, but from where I live up to like Scotland, like every now and again, and just sitting with people, understanding their experience, learning from them was incredibly important. And sponsorship too, the bit that got me the transition from where I was to where I went was one person who kind of could really see that was where I was headed, and they were in a senior position, and they helped out with being able to move me into the other team. And I think without that, I would have struggled to make the leap. So I'm sort of hugely appreciative of that person for doing that thing, because they didn't have to, but they sort of saw something and really helped out.
That's great. That's and really helpful for you too, right? But I suppose you could say a lot of that stems from your drive and your desire to get yourself out there and get seen.
Yeah.
So
I'll take the credit for that.
Sometimes you make your own luck, right?
Yeah.
So for other people looking to try to progress and map out what their career may look like, what would you say are the kind of key skills that someone may need to succeed in how they can get into compliance type roles?
So for a compliance role, there are lots of skills that are very useful that you don't necessarily need to get through doing the role. So firstly, I think being able to kind of analyse and interpret complex information, knowing the right questions to ask, being really inquisitive, being really curious, all of those things are incredibly helpful. Then I would say that there are some quite sort of basic skills, which some people find easier than others. And, I appreciate that while this might come naturally to me, it can be a real challenge for other people. So report writing, being able to consolidate that information that you've gathered and present it back in a format that they can understand. Yeah. And I think particularly as you develop in your career, not necessarily something that you need to do when you start out, is being able to understand the information needs of your audience and communicate the information to them in the right way. So if you're preparing a paper for a board, there is little point in preparing 5 pages of detailed analysis as to why you think they should do the thing. Yeah. You need to give them a page, perhaps 2. It tells them what they need to do and why they need to do it. But at the same time, if you're then going to a team of people in in operations and saying you need to do this, well, just telling them that they need to do it, it's not particularly helpful. You need to tell them why they need to do it and how they need to do it, and all of the additional information. So
Sure.
That's really helpful. And I think if you take that a step further, I did insights. It's not color analysis, but it's like a profiling thing a few years back, which if you ever hear people talking about colors associated with people, that's probably what they're talking about. But actually sort of understanding what individual stakeholders respond to and need is incredibly valuable, both because you don't waste your time doing something that is ultimately pointless if the person that you're speaking to doesn't need a lot of information, but also because they value you speaking to them in a way that sort of speaks to the way that they need to gather information. And I think that just sort of helps to elevate the perception of what it is that you're doing, even though what you're doing might be exactly the same. If you pitch it to them in the right way, then they're going to like it.
Absolutely. And weirdly, as you were saying all of that, and I've never really thought about it this way before, but it almost sounds like a commercial version of the customer understanding part of consumer duty, in how you understand what people's different needs are and how you adjust to those needs, how you put that information out there, help them understand it. It actually sounds very, very similar in practice.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's funny, I can't remember where I had this, but I was, very involved in consumer duty over the past few years, and sort of speaking about that consumer understanding outcome and, what it is that you need to do. Nobody is ever going to complain to you that you gave them the information in a format that was too simple or too easy for them to understand.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think if you can sort of have that in the back of your mind, I remember starting out, there probably was some value in using some long words or, coming up with the most sort of air quotes intelligent way to say something. But actually, if you simplify, you will find that most people are really receptive to that. And I think that sort of, again, goes back to the point on culture, is if you work within a good culture, you will find that people are very happy to ask what might be in sort of back in the day kind of poorer cultures, the silly questions. People can ask basic questions, and that's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's personal skills and attributes. What about from an educational background and academia, certifications, things like that?
So when I started out, having a degree was, or felt like, the kind of be all and end all. You either went to university and you got your degree and that qualified you for a certain type of job, or you didn't and that qualified you for a different type of job. I think it's different now, and certainly when I'm recruiting, I do not think that you need to have a degree to be successful in a compliance role. It's great if you went off and did that and you learned some stuff and you got some experiences from it, but it absolutely is not necessary. I'm also quite a strong believer that experience is more valuable than qualifications. So, by all means, get the qualifications. I've done certain ICA courses and other courses, and I think they're really good at giving you a, grounding in the fundamentals. They might give you exposure to things that you might not have involvement in as part of your day-to-day role. For example, when I did mine, it was around the time that corporate social responsibility was becoming popular, and that was not a new concept to me, but not something that I had ever really worked with before. So, I developed some really good insights into some good practices there. But I think getting experience is important, which again is, it's easier said than done. And probably the best thing for my career has been working in a consultancy role for a period of time, which again is sort of easier said than done. Certainly, I think it's changed a little bit now that remote working is a bit more of the norm, but back when I did it, that required you to be able to kind of get up and go, be on a client site that might be somewhere quite far from where you live for periods of time. It's not something that would necessarily work that well if you had other commitments that you were trying to juggle, but just the breadth of experience that you get through doing something like that gives you, it just ramps up your career, because you couldn't possibly get that level of experience through kind of jumping around through different roles. And I think what you would probably end up having people criticize you for moving around quite a lot, whereas in a consultancy role, you sort of get to do that scot-free.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And of course you get a nice bit of variety too. I mean, that's fair to say. I think anybody in this kind of role would likely definitely tell you that they'd have learned an awful lot more on the job than they have through doing their qualifications. As you say, the qualifications are great for giving you a grinding and a basis to start with. And actually they also gives you a decent network of people that you can talk to and help to share your experiences with, which is also quite useful. But there's no real substitute for actually doing the job and learning, shadowing other people and working with other people that are in your organisation, and perhaps also, as you say, from being on client site, but also just being at your own office. We're all kind of isolated now, right? We all have either hybrid or remote working, but you do tend to lose a bit of that ability to interact with people and learn a bit more while you're in an office.
Yeah, I think it must be hard for people starting out, particularly in compliance functions now, in a very different way. And I am a sort of huge supporter of sort of remote and hybrid working. For me, I was in a funny position where I was in a mostly remote position before the pandemic. And so actually for me, when everybody started turning their cameras on and everyone was remote working, that was brilliant. But yeah, I do think that it's challenging, because people are going to lose out on the experiences that they might get from working with other people. But I do think that there are ways around it. Time spent with people kind of physically or virtually, and actually a lot of the sort of external advisory type groups do a lot more online now. So we're part of the Collaboration Network, which is a group that's been established, and it covers various different regulated sectors. And people meet quite regularly to talk about things. And I noticed I went to one of their summits a while back, and there were people who have obviously built really strong relationships within that network, kind of presenting back to big rooms of people. So there's definitely ways and means to do it now. I think it's just very different.
Yeah, and it's quite useful too for horizon scanning and changing regulation. That a lot of that is a lot more digital, so that there are plus points too, right?
Yeah, definitely. Horizon scanning is great when you're getting sort of multiple emails a day telling you about what's changing. Less great when it's lots and lots of emails from the FCA with Dear CEO letters and things that then add to your workload.
Yeah, indeed. But as somebody starting out in compliance, I find, for me, I find that I learned quite a lot from getting involved in horizon scanning and trying to understand, what the landscape looks like now, how it's changing, and getting involved in that. It helps you to kind of piece that stuff together, I think.
Yeah, I remember in one of my first days as a consultant, I was given the task of interpreting. I think it was an FCA policy statement that came out on structured investment products. And I had there was like 20 something me with absolutely no idea of what a structured investment product was. But by the end of it, I definitely knew, and I could definitely tell you all about the changes that were happening around structured products. So I completely agree with you. And actually within my team at the moment, we have got some excellent people, one of whom started out in a compliance role from having done more of an operational roles. And they are absolutely fantastic at sort of picking up that stuff and running with it and then applying it to what they do day to day.
Yeah. It's a great basis for a foundation, I think, especially when you're starting. Yeah. So moving on to newcomers and a bit from an advisory perspective, is there any advice that you'd give somebody who's looking to start out a career in compliance?
I probably go back to what I said earlier and kind of just get yourself some experience, and you could do that by shadowing somebody who's doing a role, sort of trying to get involved in a project that might have some regulatory change within it, or might have some sort of regulatory features. But then also sort of take the time to understand a bit more about the system that you're operating in. So I work predominantly in retail financial services. And so, our regulator, the FCA, has a handbook, which is online. I was once asked by an American if it was possible to get a copy in paper, which I think you can do. I think it costs several £100s. And I had to try and explain to them that you just wouldn't do that. Start to navigate around that. I recently learnt through spending some time with one of our teams in a lunch and learn type session that people are not really familiar with that, and it kind of scares them. And so I was sort of showing them how it works and kind of where I'd get the information from. And, just being able to do that will put you a step above somebody else who sort of hasn't taken the time to look at those systems and think about interpreting the information. So just read lots, attend webinars. Like, there's so many free webinars out there that will talk to you about all different types of things. And, consumer duty is a hot topic. You will get so much information from attending webinars, reading papers, chatting to people who work in the industry.
Absolutely agreed. So thinking about a similar angle, but let's say you're looking at hiring somebody for a compliance role, somebody new to industry that's looking to progress their career. What sorts of things could they demonstrate to you that might make them attractive as a potential person to take on?
So, enthusiasm. I have seen in the people, all the people within my team, like a real enthusiasm for compliance, which sounds a bit naff. But actually, I think if you've got people who genuinely think it's a good thing to do, that's always going to help, because they will approach things from the perspective of, this is a good thing to do, rather than, I'm going to come in here and challenge you.
Yeah.
Being inquisitive and curious, ask loads of questions. There is nothing worse, and I have experienced this in the past in other roles with sort of more junior members of the team sort of coming in, and they might nod at the right things or kind of imply that they understand the right things, but they don't ask questions, and then things start to fall over a bit. So ask those questions. There are no stupid questions.
No.
Ask the same question in loads of different ways if you're not getting the answer that you're that's helping you to understand what it is that you need to know. And then I think just identifying opportunities yourself for development. So that doesn't mean that you have to be able to determine like everything that the team needs to do or that you need to do to develop in your role. I think your manager and other people might have a role to play in that. But find things that you think that you want to be able to do, and find ways to progress that, or find the training that you want to do and ask for it.
Yeah, agreed. I think similarly for me, I think over the course of my career and having teams of people, I was always more interested in attitude. Really, you can't teach that, right? I'm quite happy that if I need to teach somebody how to do their job, easy. I can do that all day long. I can't teach somebody to have the right attitude towards their job and what they're interested in. So that was always far more important to me as to whether they have the right necessarily background experience.
Absolutely. And though, I've worked with lots of different people over my time, but it's the people who are inquisitive and who just have that sense of why we're doing it. We're doing it for the customer, and what's important to the customer and to the business, and being able to sort of think about those things and balance those things.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. Excellent. Final question. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners who may be interested in breaking into compliance?
Do it. It's a great job to be in. There is always something new to get involved in. There are always exciting things that you can help with. And I think I said this earlier, but I really do believe that a good compliance and risk function enables the business to do
Yeah.
what they want to do. And when you've got that senior management buy-in and a positive culture, not only are you enabling, but you're also getting the kind of thank yous and the, you're being included in the group of people that's praised for enabling, and you
Yeah.
can't beat that, really.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us today. I'm sure everybody would agree that there are some great insights there, some great advice, and it's been a real pleasure to hear about your journey and how you've got there.
Oh, likewise. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure. Thank you very much.